Good evening. This Shabbos is Parshas Re'eh, and the Or Chaim HaKadosh asks at the very offset that Re'eh is a singular, and later in the pasuk says Re'eh hineni nosein lefanecha bracha uklala. The word lefanecha is plural. So why would the pasuk begin with the word Re'eh and not Re'u, which is the plural? And in general, the question is, why is the word Re'eh even there? It just could begin, Hineni nosein lochem, or nosein lefanecha, bracha uklala. You don't even need the word Re'eh. But he answers and says that there are so many things that people don't notice in life. The gift of life itself, the health, the children, the livelihood, the parnasa. So many things go favorably for each and every individual. So even though Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking and giving over what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, and it was to the entire Jewish people, to Klal Yisrael, but he began addressing the individual, because we know that individuals, we, each and every one of us, tend to slide into the sea of despair or disappointment when anything in our life doesn't go the way we want it to go. There's 20 other things that are beautiful. We don't even notice it quite often. So therefore, it begins with the singular to wake up the individual, as if you're speaking just to him, as what the Torah wants to convey the message, that each and every one of you wake up and see how fortunate you are. Now, we know that the word bracha means blessing, but there's another word, hatzlacha, and the Torah doesn't say here hatzlacha, it says bracha. And the Yid HaKadosh said in Parshas Vayeshev that if you take note, when Yosef was working in Potiphar's house, it says 3 times, V'chol asher hu osa Hashem matzliach biyado, that there were the lashon 3 times of hatzlacha. And then suddenly the pasuk says, Vayehi meyoz ki hifked oso al kol beiso, that Potiphar said, you know what, Yosef, I trust you, I'm giving everything over under your umbrella, under your directive, and do as you understand and see. So he was already moved out from under the roof of Potiphar, says the Yid HaKadosh, that Hatzlacha is very good, but it's not the level of bracha. And under the goy's hashpah, he could not be zoicha to bracha. Only after, he was matzliach. That means if a person has a store and he makes every week $1,000, and then suddenly, one week he made 2,000, that's called hatzlacha. But if one week he made from the 1,000, 20,000, that's bracha already. And Vayehi meyoz ki hifked also, when Yosef HaTzadik stood on his own 2 feet and was able to now make the decisions in the business of Potiphar, it went from hatzlacha to bracha. In our Sedra, in the first pasuk, it mentions bracha, o klala. That means you can achieve the highest and the greatest, which is bracha. Or chas v'shalom, every day of a Yid's life, he can slip down the ladder and end up with Chas v'Shalom Nebuch, the actual klala. So we know that this Shabbos is Shabbos Mevorachim Elul. Now Elul has in it the special components, because when you prepare a Seudah for Shabbos, on Wednesday you're shopping, on Thursday you're cooking or beginning to bake. It doesn't just happen Friday night when you serve the food. You have to have careful and ambitious preparation, and that will bring out the taste, it'll bring out the flavor, it will bring out the variety, because you're working over a few days to produce a Suda L'Koved Shabbos. The same thing is with Elul. I mentioned once to you that the fight between Yaakov Avinu and Esav, his brother, the Sar Shel Esav, Medrash says one of the important issues was the fight and who controls the month of Elul. Because Elul is the Hachana for Rosh Hashanah and Aser Simei Tshuva and Yom Kippur. And if you don't have careful preparation, then you can't just dive into Rosh Hashanah. Now the Medrash says that Yaakov Avinu, he got Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan, because he wanted to have the months that Pesach Sheni, and Shavuos had to come out. And he got it. But right away, Esav, the Sar Shel Esav, jumped up and grabbed Tammuz of an Elul. So he understood, Yaakov Avinu, that we have to, before the Geula Shlema, we have to always throw a bone to the Samach Mem. And that's why we have hairs on the tefillin, we have Mayim Achronim, the Gemara says we have Mayim Achronim because of the salt on the fingers, but Al Pi Kabbalah, the reason that we have Mayim Achronim is because after a Suda, that so many neshamas are elevated through the Suda and through the Divrei Torah, that before the Geula Shlema, we have to throw a bone to the Samach Mem. So Yaakov Avinu let Tammuz and Av go, and that's why we have the 6 weeks of Tammuz and Av, which are really under the caption of the Samach Mem of the Yetzer Hara. The second half of Av, where we are currently in, basking in the luster of Chesed and Rachamim, that we are able to enjoy the Chesed and Rachamim in the fullest sense. But Yaakov Avinu said, even though I took 3 months in the beginning, the Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan, but I am not maskem to Esav having the power over Elul. And that was one of the victories of that night's fight between Yaakov Avinu and the Sar Shel Esav, that Yaakov Avinu was able to pull back under his canopy the month of Elul. Now, we know that with Rosh Chodesh Elul, and in Elul, it's a month of Achona. We sound the shofar every single day, and it's not the shofar, the mitzvah of shofar, like we have Rosh Hashanah. That's the diaraisa of sounding shofar and every yid hearing the shofar. That is the power of the month. We say, L'David Hashem Ori V'Yishi, to fortify and uplift the propelling power of the days of Elul and making them exceedingly effective in its being an antidote, a preparation for Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Yemei Tshuva, and Yom Kippur. Now the Bnei Yissaschar brings that there are 40 days between Rosh Chodesh Elul and Yom Kippur. And he says that just like a mikveh, which possesses 40 saw, there's a measurement called saw. So you need at least 40 saw of water in the mikveh, and the Mishnah in Mikvos even talks about if there's exactly 40 saw and somebody goes into the mikveh and is toivel, they come out dripping with water, so they removed some of the water in the mikveh. It's on them as they dipped and they were toivel in the mikveh, that there may not be left 40 saw, maybe 39 point whatever. But we need 40 saw. And there's another measurement called log. Now there are 40 saw, and there's 24 lugan in each saw. So in a mikveh you have 40 saw, and each saw has 24 lugan. So 24 times 40 means that you have 960 lugan in a mikveh. So says the Bnei Yissaschar that there are 40 days from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur, through Yom Kippur, and in each day there are 24 hours. So you have a total of 960 hours in the Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur, through Yom Kippur. And says the Bnei Yissaschar that just like a mikveh is metaher and mezachech and purifies a yid with its 960 lugan, that a yid is purified with the 960 hours from Rosh Chodesh Elul through Yom Kippur, that it has the power of tahara just like a mikveh when a person goes in and immerses himself in the actual mikveh. Now, if you go into most shuls, Erev Yom Kippur or Erev Rosh Chodesh, which is Yom Kippur Katan, because we don't have just Yom Kippur for Kapara and Tshuva. Every Erev Rosh Chodesh is a day, and there are people who fast, and if you go into Shomer Shabbos, they're laning Vayachal, because the people who fast have to lane Vayachal. And they dispense with the regular parsha of that day, let's say a Monday or a Thursday, that normally we would lane from the upcoming Sedra on a Monday or Thursday. But if it's Erev Rosh Chodesh, it becomes Yom Kippur Katan, and we lane Vayachal like on a fast day. Now, most people do not do this. In other words, it's a minhag. It's not a halacha of doing this. But unusually so, the number of people who go Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul has a special distinction, as I've just spoken to you, and it has a special power, because the Rosh Chodesh carries in it the whole essence of the whole month. And the Shabbos before the Rosh Chodesh, like this year, Rosh Chodesh comes out on Tuesday and Wednesday. So this Shabbos Mevorachim, carries the power of the Rosh Chodesh, which in turn carries the power of the entire Chodesh, which leads us right into Rosh Hashanah. So, everyone should this Shabbos do something. If they say Tillim on Shabbos, let them say 2 or 3 extra prokim. Give an extra $1 to tzedakah right before Shabbos. And we're going to talk about tzedakah in just a moment. But before I go on with discussing Parshas Re'eh, there was a vort that I wanted to tell you last week, from last week's Sedra, which pertains to Elul and Rosh Hashanah, but I ran out of time basically. So I want to just take the few moments, because I think it's Nogeya and it's beautiful vort. One part of it is from the Balatanya, and the other part of it is from the Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Reb Yoel, the real Satmar Rebbe in Williamsburg. Zechuso Yogein Aleinu. And the Balatanya asked the following question. The pasuk says, "Einei Hashem Elokecha ba mereishis hashana v'ad achris shana," that the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are on Eretz Yisrael from the beginning of the year to the end. And many times, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe was asked, when a war was starting in Eretz Yisrael, should we run to Cyprus? Should we run out of Eretz Yisrael? Who knows what's going to happen? That was his answer, this pasuk. Einei Hashem Elokecha ba mereishis hashana vad achris shana. It's the safest place to be. And even the Pnei Menachem, who was a Ger Rebbe around 50 years ago, was asked by his Hasidim if they should run out of Eretz Yisrael because of the war, the impending war. And Saddam Hussein was threatening he's going to wipe out this city, he's going to wipe out that city, and people were really, truly afraid. Well, the Lubavitcher Rebbe answered, it's the safest place to be. Don't go. And the Ger Rebbe told all of his 50 or 70,000 Hasidim and families not to go. I asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and this is what he answered. And indeed, nobody was killed by the weaponry and the artillery of any of those enemies, Yemach Shemam V'Zichram. So the Balatanya asked a question that in that pasuk, there's a hey in front of the word shana, mereishis hashana. And at the end of the pasuk, it says, vad achris shana. There's no hey. So he said, grammatically, al pi diktuk, that's an impossibility. In other words, either both words shana should have had a hey in front, or both words should have no hey. But to put a hey in one shana and not on the other, it's out of order. So he explained and said that every year has its own or and its own mazel. And it was created in Sheshis Yemei Bereshis, which means if we're in 5,784, that when the world was created, there was a separate or and mazel prepared for each and every year. And when we finished the year, right going in by Shkia into Rosh Hashanah, the old or of that year goes back to Shemayim into the file cabinet, and it serves only for 1 year. And the new one comes down. It begins to come down by Tekiah Shofar. It becomes full force ahead for Klal Yisrael for the year. So the Balatanya answered and says the reason that there's a hey on one shana and not on the other, because it's the hey hayediyah that it is proclaiming and underscoring the fact, Hashanah, that this year has its own uniqueness and specialness. Because the new or for just that year, and with that it's explained that let's say you find someone who for 18 years had no children. And then suddenly they went to every doctor, they went here, they went there, they've been davening, they're running to kvarim, they're trying their best to have a family. But it doesn't happen. And then suddenly, after 18 years of marriage, 14 years of marriage, she's expecting. So that's what the Balkany means, because there's a special or that relates to each and every neshama. And that neshama of that husband and wife, they needed to attach themselves to the new or and the new mazel of that brand new year. And that's how they were able with their tefillah to effectuate the bakoshes that they were asking for in terms of parnasa, in terms of shidduchim, in terms of children, every bakosha. But that's how it could happen, and that's why they say never give up. Because no one should say, look, I opened up 6 businesses, I lost all my money, and my aunt's money who I borrowed from, and my brother's money, and nothing went. And then suddenly one year they became multi-millionaires because they needed that year, that special or, and that special mazel. So that's what the Balkany says, why the hay is on one shana and not the other, to stress that it's a distinct year in its own right. Hashana, the hay hayadiyah. But the Satmar Rebbe said a different thing in this regard. And he said that when Rosh Hashanah comes, many people make promises and pledges for the year. They're going to learn more, and this year they're going to go from house to house and do more chesed. The yeshiva bacher says, I only learned this year 40 blot, next year I'll learn 60 blot, and I'll make sure that I accomplish it. So we take some very lofty responsibilities on our shoulders, all devar mitzvah, everything good, everything, whether it's davening, whether it's tillim, whether it's chesed, whether it's Torah, whatever it is. And that's the Hashanah. This year is going to be the special year. But when we come to the end of the year, the end of the pasuk, it's regular Shana. Unfortunately, we promised a lot, we committed a lot, but it didn't end up necessarily the way we thought and the way we wanted it to be, and it ended up just another average year like any other year. So said the Satmar Rebbe, and since we are now Shabbos Mevorachim of Elul, and we're ready to usher in a new year, I couldn't leave out this vort with the Satmar and with the Balatanya last week and not come into this week just forgetting it. I wanted to share that with you. Now, the Maral asks a question on the Inyan of Tzedakah. The source in Psukim in the Torah about Tzedakah is this week. And as the Arizal says, that Tzedakah is something that is so high that even though in the Shem of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Vav is Torah learning, which is high, and then the last Hey of Yud Kei Vav is mitzvahs. So mitzvahs are lower than the schus of Torah learning. However, There is such a thing in the Torah, and it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, Kri and Ksiv. That means we have 5 places in the Torah that if you read the word the way it's written, it would not be the way we pronounce it. So if it's written this way, why do we pronounce it differently? And the answer is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, this is how you're going to write it, and if someone pronounces it the way it looks, it's wrong. I want it to be pronounced this and this way. So the Balkoira would say a different pronunciation than what's written actually there, changing a vowel or changing a letter, and that's called Kri and Ksiv. So says the Arizal and the Bnei Yissaschar that Torah is one thing and mitzvahs is something else, but there's in between those 2 levels is like Kri and Ksiv is the mitzvah of tzedakah. And you should know that the only mitzvah that Chazal say on it, Tatzel Mimoves, that you can save lives with tzedakah, and it's Mevi Geula. About Shabbos, it doesn't say Tatzel Mimoves. But by tzedakah it says. And that tells you that the power of tzedakah is unbelievable. Now, in the Gemara Baba Basra says that there was a Yid, a big tzaddik named Binyamin HaTzaddik, and that's what the Gemara calls him. And he was a Gabbai tzedakah. And a woman came to him and said, Rebbe, I need tzedakah. I have 7 children at home and myself. And Binyamin HaTzaddik said to her, I'm sorry, but today I gave everything out. There isn't a pruta that's left for me to give to you. So she said, I understand what you're saying, but I just want you to know one thing. We are all holding by death. And if I don't get food for myself and my children, we're going to be dead within hours. Binyamin HaTzaddik heard the woman say this and became frightened. And he looked in his pockets, his own private pockets, not the Kupa Shel Tzedakah, the Gemara says, and he found a little bit of money, and he realized that that's the money for his family to have food. So when Binyamin HaTzaddik heard what this woman said, he took out the money and said, okay, my family will be hungry, but they'll be hungry, they won't be dead. And he gave her the money. Shortly thereafter, the Gemara says that there was a gezerah that Binyamin HaTzaddik should die, get sick and die. So the Malachei Hasharis jumped up and said, Rabbanu Shalom, you said that if somebody saves the life of one person, it's as if he saved the entire world. And here, Binyamin HaTzaddik saved 8 people, the mother and the 7 children. So why should this gezerah be effective and that he should die? And the Rabbanu Shalom answered, the Gemara says, and said, you know, you are right, and was mevatel the gezerah. So the Gemara concludes and says, and Binyamin HaTzaddik got well, and he lived another 22 years. So the Meforshim ask, the Marsha, different Meforshim, why 22 years? Why didn't he live 20 years, 25 years? Why was it exactly? Because the Gemara in Soita says that if a person has a schus, and they like the schus in Shemayim, that means he made a Kiddush Hashem. He held the door for someone who was either not religious or not even a Yid. But the person said, wow, look at the behavior of the Yid. That's a Kiddush Hashem, and that's a big schus. But it doesn't have to be just that. It can be any big schus. So the Gemara there says that he is zoicha to 3 months extra of life. Now, the Gemara says also that if a person gives tzedakah, he is zoicha to 6 different brachas. V'hamafayaso, and if he not only gives the tzedakah, but he says something nice to uplift the spirit of this ani, of this person, then he ends up with an extra 5 brachas. It's 11 brachas for 1 schus. That's 3 months for each one. So there were 8 people here that he saved, Binyamin HaTzadik. And if you multiply 8 by 11 for each one of them, it's 88. And if you multiply 88 for each one of those schusim, it comes out a total of 264 months. Each schus gives you 3 months, and he had 88, so 88 times the 3 is 264, and 264 is propelled, that's the amount of months, equals exactly 22 years that he had as a gift of life because of that day that he put his hand in his pocket and took out the money he was going to buy groceries for his own family and gave it to save this family. I mean, it's unbelievable the lesson that we have of all of the schus of tzedakah. And there is a story that happened in Vilna around 300 years ago, that there was a Yid who was traveling from city to city, and he came to Vilna. And I happened to have seen this. I was in Vilna, and I saw in the cemetery what this man saw on his travels, that there were 2 brothers buried together in the cemetery, one right next to each other. And on one matzeva, it says, Kappa Porso Leoni, which is a pasuk from, we know we sing Eishes Chayil every Friday night, and Kappa Porso Leoni is one of the psukim. And on one matzeva, it said those 3 words. Kappa, her hand, Porsa was spread out, extended, La'oni, to Oni. V'yadeha, and the other hand, Shilcha Lo Evyon, went out, was outstretched to a impoverished poor person. So he was curious, what is this strange, half the pasuk is on one matzeva and half the pasuk is on another matzeva. What's this? So he went and asked a zokein, in an elderly person that he found in Vilna, and he said there's a story behind it, and I will tell you the story, that there were 2 brothers who lived here in Vilna, and they were fabulously wealthy, and they gave out tzedakah above and beyond, and they were Talmidei Chachamim, they learned every day a number of hours. I mean, they were like really master models of what a Yid should be. They're davening, they're learning, they're tzedakah, and then they started to lose their money. And the Bezdin in Vilna said, this is going to be a terrible Chilul Hashem. that the people of the city are going to say, what? How could Hashem do such a thing? These are people who are busy learning and davening and giving all day and night. And now they're losing their money. So Bezdin decided that they're going to take 3 people to examine what is the life and what happens in the daily activity and the Seder Hayom of these 2 brothers. And after a few months, they came back and they said to the Bezdin, we watched them how they ate, we watched them how they davened, we watched them how they gave out their tzedakah with a yod rachava, a full hand and a happy heart. They learned besimcha. We can't understand it ourselves, but the only thing that we could pin it on is the fact that they gave so much tzedakah. You know, the Gemara says a person should give aser to aser, 10% of their profit of their wage to tzedakah. The Gemara says that if they want, they could exceed the 10% up to 20%. But they're not supposed to go more than 20%, because the Gemara says that if chas v'shalom, let's say one year they gave out $1 million, and the next year he's choking for money. So he may come to say, Oy Gevalt, what did I give out $1 million last year? I could have given $500,000 and it would still have been beautiful, and I exceeded 20% even, but I could have given half of what I gave and it would have still been just 20%, not so much more. Because the Gemara says that if a person regrets a mitzvah they did, they lose the schus. They lose the schus. And that a person should never come to a position of being tight on money and regretting how much money he gave. So therefore it says he shouldn't give out more than 20%. Now, and that really is what the Gemara says, and the reason it gives why not to give more than that actual 20%. But the truth is that tzaddikim, like the Arizal lists, for every Aveira, how much to wipe out the Aveira on your record, how much you have to fast. But tzaddikim came 300 years ago, 200 years ago, and said, Klal Yisrael is too weak to invoke on themselves, to accept on themselves fasting, because the Arizal says, for this Aveira, it's 36 fast days. For that Aveira, we would be fasting all day, every day of the year. We wouldn't be eating anything. And we are not strong enough, we could not survive. So they give one eitzah. The only mitzvah that you could do that in place of fasting can wipe out Averis, and especially Averis of men, the way you can wipe it out is through tzedakah. And there's a cheshbon that the Arizal makes, that for such and such amount of Averis, this is how much money you should give. But giving money is a lot easier than fasting. And who wants to stay with the cheshbon of the Averis that we did because we can't fast? So a person so the Balatanya and others say that even though the Gemara says you should not give more than 20%, because you should never put yourself into a matzav of regretting what you did, but in these days, and he said these days 250 years ago, today there's a lot more tumah out there and a lot worse things happening than what happened then. He said at least we have an eitzah of tzedakah that can pull us out of Gehenna with the cheshbon of our Averis. coming back to our story, so these people came back to the Beis Din and said that the only thing that we could imagine is the reason that they're having a tough time is because they've given out too much tzedakah against what the Gemara says. So Beis Din in Vilna, and this is a true story with these two brothers whose kvarim, their matzevis, they're right there in the 50, 100 feet away from the Vilna Gaon, who's buried in that cemetery. The Beis Din said, we're going to put an apitropos, we're going to appoint someone who's going to monitor the tzedakah that they give. And every time a person comes to them for tzedakah, they're going to have to send the person over to this group who's monitoring them, and they will give them the $18 or whatever it is. Now the brothers knew what was happening, and the Beis Din wanted it this way, so they accepted it, but they felt bad. So they began giving out silver things that they had in the house. They had like 5 sets of silverware that was beautiful, real silver. So a guy came in for tzedakah, and they said, look, the Beis Din paskin for us that you have to go to so-and-so, this address, and you have to get the tzedakah from him. But meantime, we feel that we'd like to give you something in addition. And they took out a spoon, a silver spoon, they gave it. The spoon was worth $200 or $100. Until it came a time that they gave out every silver item in their possession. So a Yid came in for tzedakah, and they wanted to give. They told him where to go to pick up a check to get money, but they wanted to give him also. And they realized that all they had left was 1 silver spoon. So one brother broke the spoon in half and took the handle of the spoon and gave it to him, and the other one gave the spoon part, the kappa, the actual vessel, part of the spoon that you put the food into. And that's why on their matzeva, on one's it said kappa porcelioni, referring to the handle, and the other one had on his matzeva, v'yadeha shilcha lo evyon, had the actual spoon part on it written on his matzeva. And throughout the Doros, when people were sick, people were murdered, people were massacred, the first thing they did, they said Shema Yisrael, and they gave a pruta tzedakah. In many cases, there was miraculous savings. Many cases, min hashamayim, there was a cheshbon why they had to be killed, and they were killed, but they left the world with a Shema Yisrael and with a schos tzedakah. So I always, before Yontif in my school for 50 years, and I meet students who were students 40 years ago, they remember that many of them bring up the first thing. Before Yontif, like before, let's say, Rosh Hashanah, I gave them an apple, because we eat apples, the steat tapuchim, and we'll talk about why it's an apple and not an orange or a pear. I gave them an apple with a dime to tzedakah, and that they should give and have the schus of tzedakah. Erev Yom Kippur, I gave them a piece of lekach, of sponge cake with tzedakah. I gave them before Sukkot grapes with tzedakah. Before Hanukkah, I gave them a donut for Hanukkah with tzedakah. So every Yom Tif they went home with something, l'kovid the Yom Tif, and l'kovid the inyan and the schus and the tatzel mimoves and the mevi geula of tzedakah. Now we have in the parsha, this parsha besides tzedakah has a big segment about all the kosher animals and birds in our Sedra that we have. And one pasuk talking about birds says, the ra'ah, it's a type of a bird. There's different translations of what ra'ah is, and then it says the ayah, and then it says the dayah. And Rashi says on this pasuk that it's not three separate birds. It's one bird with three different names. And the Chazal, the Medrash, they all go on, why did this bird have to have three separate names? No other animal that's listed in this parsha, the animals and the chayas and the birds, no one has more than one name. But this bird had three names. And they explain, Ra'ah, and Rashi brings it, it means to see. That this bird had such keen eyesight that it was able, and the example Rashi says, that it was stood outside Bavel, outside Eretz Yisrael, and it was V'ro'a nevela be'eretz Yisrael. That means it could see 30 miles away. If there was a carcass in the middle of the street, it could be standing in Iraq and see it in the middle of Tel Aviv or Yerushalayim. And the Meforshim explain, why does it give an example that it could see a carcass, a nevela? That's an ugly thing. Why doesn't it say that it could stand in Bavel and it sees the beautiful grapes and the luscious fruits of Eretz Yisrael? Say that it could say, you want to express that it's called ra'ah, that it means to see, because it could see that far. And what does it see? The good things. But it gives a very ugly example. And this is Rashi. I mean, from Chazal. The Medrash says this, that it sees the nevela. Because when there's so much good to see, there are some who only see the bad. They could look and they could see a panorama of beauty and picturesque dimensions of such good scenery and good things, but it sees only the bad. It would pick the nevela in the middle of the street to accentuate how its strength is in its seeing, because that's all it accentuates and underscores is the negativity. The next name, and that's why it's tameh. It's not a kosher animal, it's tameh. It's not kosher. The next name is ayah. Ayah means where is, and the Chazal say, the Medrash says that this bird they couldn't catch, because every time that it felt that it was being hunted, it hid in a place that they couldn't find it. And that's a message to people, because ayah means ayeh, where are you? Like we say in Kedusha of Keser, ayeh mekom kevodo. That this bird hides so well and it's so cunning that a hunter can't catch it. It's very, very hard. And that's talking about the person that every time there is something going on in his shul or his community, that he suddenly disappears. No one can find him. We want to give out to 10 people different jobs to get the job done, and they find 9, but there's one person that he knows where to hide and how to hide and never make himself available. And the third is Daya. And Daya means, and that's the third name they gave this bird, because he always is running away from doing his fair share. Oh, there's a Malava Malka coming, so the proceeds of that Malava Malka should go to that poor Kala who's having a wedding in 8 weeks, and there's not enough money. Oh, there's enough money, Daya. There's enough. And that's what the word Daya means. That there's always an excuse and a rationalization of why not to participate. And all we know is that really it's simply one thing. It's the Yetzer Hara coming out with a fierce battle to get that person off of its target of doing extreme good, and always coming up with the idea on adaya. Oh no, you have people that answer the door, oh, well, I was going to give him really $5, but I'm giving him $1 because I don't think he needs it. Look how he's dressed, and look how this, and look how that. There is always the excuse of not giving. And we have to remember that to test HaKadosh Baruch Hu is forbidden. That means if a person ran to a hospital and fed 20 people every day for 6 months, and then he gets some bad news in his business, and he says, Rabbanu Shalom, save me. I mean, look what I did for 6 months. I was running every day for 3 hours in the hospital to feed the people who needed help. So isn't that worthy of you turning things around for me after all the good that I did? That's called testing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's an Isser D'Oraisa to test HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo senasun es Hashem Elokeichem. You're not supposed to test HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there's one exception. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Uv'chonuni no bezos. I'm begging you, test me. Give tzedakah till it hurts. And if you think, and the Yetzer Hara comes and says, what are you doing? Where are you going to have money? How are you going to pay your bills? You're giving your money away. What are you doing? So when you still give the money, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't wait to see, test me. You gave out, you had $1,000 in your pocket and you gave out $400, and you think you may not have enough money to buy your groceries. You're going to see that something's going to happen. You're going to end up with every piece of grocery item that you wanted lechatchila, and you will never be stuck for money in the money that you had because you gave it away to tzedakah. So the most beautiful parsha, talking about kosher food and about tzedakah, don't forget, kosher food versus treif. A person eats something treif, it doesn't say by Shabbos that if you don't keep Shabbos, you're metamtem delev. Besides the Isser Lav that the person gets for doing the Aveir of eating treif, they also are metamtem, they're drenching their neshama with tumah. And it's by the foods that the person eats. So we have a key to coming into Elul, and what we have to do to elevate our maisim, our mitzvahs, the purity of thought. Not we're doing it off to be doing it to be patted on the back, and that people should be saying, "Oh, look at him! You know, look what he's doing. He's do it purely, and then it comes like a polished diamond that has been shaped and molded and put into the most beautiful wrapping of velvet, ribbons, and colorful paper wrapping, that it's not just the diamond that comes out, but your appetite is already whetted, W-H-E-T, whetted, when you see just the wrappings before the diamond, and then al-achas kama v'kama, the diamond itself. Have a guten Chodesh, a guten Shabbos, habo aleinu l'toiva.